everybody. This is Raul from Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of kicking off the year of bass amplification, which we have declared 2017 to be, with none less than David Nordschow. And part of we're doing this because David is my go-to expert when it comes to things bass amplification. And we're going to cover some kind of basic things, but then we're going to speak more specifically to David's gear, which DNA amplification has some great equipment, and I think you guys want to know more about it, and I want to know more about it as well. So, David, thanks for taking time to share with us today. One of the things that I notice, I think that when it comes to amplification, musicians are just kind of at the mercy of trial and error. And it's really difficult to know what you should go with or how you should put things together. I think that's the reason a lot of people go with combos, because the decisions are already made for them. And as far as watts and speakers, and it's either they get it and they like it, or they get it and end up having to trade it in and find something else later on. I know that you have been pairing cabs and heads. What is the process? What are you thinking when you're trying to put a amplifier and a cabinet together to get things to match in an ideal way?
Well, that's a good question, and you're absolutely right. When you buy a combo, you get something that's a series of choices for that application that somebody else has made. Those may be great choices, they might be middle-of-the-road choices, they might be not so great. Kind of depends on what you've got and what you need. Mm-hmm. If you're playing loud situations and you try and come in with a 12-inch combo with a 60 or 70 watt amplifier, you're probably not going to be very satisfied with it. If you're going to play in your bedroom with it, you'll probably be thrilled if it's a nice product. Mm-hmm. And they vary quite a bit. I mean, they go from being really good to being really mediocre. It really depends on what you've got and the performance capabilities of that particular item. So the problem with the combo is, like I said, everything is set. You really can't do much with it. It's already cooked in the batter. So mm-hmm. If it's set, it's set. When you've got a chance to combine cabinets and heads together, you have a lot more flexibility. So if you're playing, for instance, a small room, but you want to have enough sound to, say, keep up with the brass section or something, you can tailor a small system to do that, whereas with a combo, you might not be okay. If you're in a bigger situation, like a larger main stage, you're probably going to want a bigger set of cabinets to give you some more feel in a larger room. And that's going to be easier to do if you can mix and match your cabinets and your heads.
Gotcha. Now, when we talk about heads, how many watts? I know you've got an 800 watt and a 1300, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
It's probably easier to have more than you need and not turn up the volume than it is to not have enough and try to crank it to the max and get sound out of it.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's the way I've always done things. People usually tend to buy what they can afford, which mm-hmm. isn't often enough. And it's always better to have more on reserve than you need, because you may get in that situation where you just have to have it. Mm-hmm. And rather than tear something up, you'll be fine.
Is there when we're pairing a cab and an amp head, is there an imminent danger of having like too much power out of a head that it's going to, blow your speakers or anything like that?
Yeah, if you don't match them correctly, mm-hmm. Or one component or the other component underperforms or performs in an entirely different range than the other one. For instance, you've got a 1,000 watt head in a mediocre 200 watt cabinet that doesn't have a lot of bottom end response or doesn't have enough voice coil capacity to really drive the speakers well. You're going to wind up mechanically hitting the limits of that system pretty early. With a big amp like that, you could definitely tear it up. On the other hand, if you've got a very high power speaker that isn't very efficient, and you've got a smaller amplifier, you're not going to tear the speaker up mechanically, but you're going to wind up running the amplifier so hard you clip the heck out of it, and you may do some damage to it thermally. So you got to be careful to match the quality and the capability of your components to each other, just like a hi-fi system. You know, the weakest link in the chain is going to be your problem. I mean, if you've got a $10,000 amplifier and a $10,000 speaker cabinet and a $200 guitar, you're going to have a limit there somewhere.
Gotcha.
And the same reverse is true. You want to take a $6,000 bass and send it through a $59 amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always important to get the quality in your system to be pretty consistent from end to end. That'll give you the best performance, the best capabilities, and the best overall system for your money.
Gotcha. So since we're talking about the individual components, let's talk a little bit about your cabs, particularly the DNS 112 and the DNS 210. Each with the 112, again, a little bit smaller, rated at about 450 watts. Looks a mighty little guy. I was running the 800 head through there, and it sounds really smooth. I mean, it's handling it quite nicely. And actually, I guess where I'll go with that is that the 800 watts, both of these cabs handled it quite well. I didn't notice any real problems with the sound or any distortion or issues. So they're quite capable to handle that amount of wattage, even though when it says what they're rated is lower watts. How does that work?
Well, the rating we've got on the back of the cabinets
Mm-hmm.
is the RMS rating.
Gotcha.
That's a continuous long-term average rating. Now, all those cabinets will do about twice that typically under playing conditions with no problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that particular cabinet will handle 900 watt peaks all day long.
Wow.
Same type of thing with the 210 within its limitations. It'll also handle that all day long. So the way we design our stuff is so that the mechanical limits and the thermal limits, the power limits, line up. With a lot of designs, you don't get that. Particularly a lot of the older school stuff. Big numbers in the power handling don't necessarily equate to how they work mechanically. Mm-hmm. You might have a very big voice coil in the speaker, but it's very short, and it can't move very far. And so when you get a certain amount of bass energy onto it, pardon me, certain amount of bass energy onto it, you'll have hit the mechanical limits of the speaker. And at that point, all you're going to do by turning up the power is add distortion and then eventually a lot of heat, because when the voice coils travel to the end of their ability, they kind of stall. And when they stall, since that power doesn't convert to energy mechanically, it converts to heat.
Gotcha.
So the speaker winds up heating a lot of its travel, and that tends to tear things up. Also, if you're in a lot of the cabinet designs are not really set up for full mechanical output. So if you hit them hard enough, sometimes you'll actually knock the speakers out of the tuning, particularly the voice coils warm up. So then you'll get a combination of a lot of power and the speakers not being well controlled by the cabinet. And then you get all sorts of secondary problems and eventual damage on those kind of systems. So it is really important to match your electrical and mechanical power to your amplifier.
I gotcha.
And that's hard, and that's hard to do because most companies don't give any mechanical specifications. You really can't find that out except, as you said, by trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds great in the store, you get out to the gig, and it's okay, and then you're out of gas halfway through the rig, halfway through the gig, pardon me.
Wow. And with your cabs, I know you're building with two different kinds of speakers, ceramic and neodymium.
Yes.
Is there an indication or a choice for either one? How would somebody know what to choose?
It's basically the way we design them. They sound virtually identical.
Mm-hmm.
The neodymium magnets are quite a bit more expensive and also quite a bit smaller. So you get a much lighter weight cabinet with the Neos. And you also get a bit more cost. So the ceramics are a little more affordable for basically the same kind of performance, but they're a little heavier. And that's really the trade-off. Now that being said, depending on whose neodymium speakers you're buying and how well they're designed, there's a lot of grades of neo. And one of the problems you get into with really inexpensive speakers, if they're neodymium, is the low grades of neodymium don't handle heat very well. And once they get heated up, the magnets discharge. and the magnetic energy actually drops in them. And the more you heat them up, the more it drops. So over time, the speaker performance just slowly ratchets down, and you can't ever fix that. And that's been a problem. You see it more in the disco systems and stuff where people are buying really, big systems at very low cost. And they use a lot of that kind of material and those kinds of things. But I've seen it in this market too. So you got to be careful what you're buying.
I got
If you don't get a good product, it can cause you long-term problems.
Gotcha. And something unique about your cabs, there's a setting on the front of them where at a 12 o'clock position, it's normal. At 3, it's plus 2 decibels. At 6, it says high range. And then around 9 o'clock, it's minus 2 decibels. What is that? How does that work?
That's basically the level control pad for the tweeter.
Gotcha.
So, and all the bass cabinets we did back in the old days with Eden, we put them in the back like everybody else did. But since I had a new chance with a new company to change things and take a fresh sheet of paper, no one likes leaning over their cabinet and showing the wrong end to the audience in the middle of a performance. This is like you just have to lean down, change that, and now, not only do you have a control for the tweeter, you can actually use that as an effect as tone control. So you can turn that tweeter up or down if you switch from fretless to fretted. You can use it for all sorts of, character effects on your instrument and your playing style. Instead of going to the amplifier and fiddling around the controls, you can just change the high range immediately. So it's got some nice usability musically for people, and it's in a much more convenient position.
Nice.
That was the basic thought behind it.
Very cool, very cool. Well, and not to mention the fact that I think a lot of times once you have your speaker set up and your amp, the last place you want to be going is behind it. So, I mean, easier access just makes total sense. Moving along, let's talk about the 800. I've got, and what I'll do for our readership, we'll put up a still photo so you know what we're talking about, and I'll probably leave it there for a while. But as we kind of work our way from left to right, of course, it starts with a 1/4-inch input, and then you have a conveniently placed mute button where you could be muting while I guess you're tuning, or is that useful? Is it okay to mute if you're plugging in and outs? Is there a stop in the flow of current? Yeah. Okay, so you could change instruments.
Yeah, that's for both of those features.
Gotcha. Then we move over to the gain knob, and I know everybody knows usually what gain is about, but also this is a pull-push feature. So what does that do?
Yeah, the way this is set up, it's a real gain control. So as you turn the control to the right, you get more amplification in the first stage. The amplification rate goes up when you turn it to the right. When you pull out that control, you get a roughly 10 dB pad. So you get an attenuation of the input signal. So you have a very hot bass, or you bring in a line level signal or something, you can attenuate that, and then the preamp will handle it properly.
Gotcha. And right to the right of it, there is, I'm going to say, are those LEDs? There's some indicators.
Yeah, there's a small indicator right next to that, which is the set level. And that's there to give you just a relative idea. When you've got the set level light flashing, nice and smoothly on and off, you're right in the middle of the sweet range of the gain structure. So you've matched your instrument and your fingers to the amplifier, and you're in a very comfortable place for the electronics.
Gotcha. And then next on the right, we've got the shape, and that is also another push-pull knob with an indicator right beside that. How would one work at setting that particularly?
Sure. Well, the shape is set up so that when it's at the 0 position, it's off.
Okay.
And then as you turn it to the right, you get more effect. And what the shape control is, it's kind of a complex curve. It gives you a bit of bass boost. There's a dip in the low mid-range, and then a slow rise out to the high end. So, for instance, if you were playing slap-style bass, it'll give you that kind of Marcus Miller character sound just in a quick setting. It also works nice for the studio, a number of other places. It just gives you a kind of a quick tone curve that a lot of people will pick out if you give them all day to play with the controls. So it's very handy. The only thing you got to be careful of with the shape control is if you're playing live with it and you crank it up a lot, because of the mid-range cut, you'll tend to have the tom-toms and the drum set kind of walk over the bass. So if you want to be in the mix, you don't want to use it too much in a live situation.
Got you. And when you pull out the knob, what does that do?
That sends you from pre-send to post-send on the DI output.
Okay.
So that gives you a pre or post selection on the DI output.
Perfect. And then next in the lineup, we have an EQ, which you've got, of course, bass, low mid, high mid, treble. And I gather with a lot of musicians, I think what they end up doing, they tend to set things just straight up. And I don't know, it's because if they don't know how to set their EQ, or they don't want to take time to play around with the curve to get it. So my guess is that for most part, it's just kind of based on your personal preference. You kind of tweak it along and see what you can get. But what recommendation would you have with your EQ?
Sure. I mean, you're right. It pretty much is based on personal considerations, perhaps room characteristics, and maybe placement of the systems. But yeah, it very much is personal. With this situation, our control, when the controls are flat, the system is flat also. So this is just nice and smooth across the whole band pass.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's a foot switch attachment for this guy, you'll probably talk about later, and there's a bypass to tone control so that you can bypass it basically with a relay and just lock it out. So you can preset a tone on here, then you can lock it out with a foot switch. So you've got two different analog settings, and the same is true of the shape control. So you can have three different soundscapes and control two of them with your foot switch.
Nice. And the indicator that's in the middle of the EQ.
Yes.
Is that what ties in with the foot switch, or?
Yes, that's the bypass.
Gotcha.
And that only works with the foot switch. There's the same kind of LED right next to the shape control.
Uh-huh.
They come on as a red LED when you engage the foot switch, and that shows you it's bypassed. Otherwise, they're normally in circuit.
Gotcha. Now, as we move along, we've got threshold, which is another one of our push-pull ones. And how would we use that?
Sure. Well, this is a full studio quality compressor. So it's got both threshold and ratio available on it. And the way it's set up, pull on this turns off the compressor. So when you pull out the knob, the compressor shuts off.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's in circuit. If you turn the controls down, it won't be active, but it's still in the circuit. And so the threshold sets up at what level this is going to occur, the engagement point of the compressor circuit. Mm-hmm. So the threshold sets up where it's going to happen, and the ratio control sets up how much. So if you want a small amount, like a subtle, soft compression, just to ride the edge, you send the ratio control over the left side. If you want a little harder one, you go to the middle. If you want like a brick wall limiter, turn it up to the right, and then you'll get full limiting action. So it's very effective. It's a THAT chip. It's the same kind of thing as in the original DBX systems back in the day. It's a very nice chip. It's got super hi-fi characteristics to it, and it's been my favorite chip for years and years. It works very well. It never has problems.
Wow. And the indicator next to the threshold, if the push is in, it's just the active, it's just showing you that it is indeed working?
Well, the active control will be blinking if it's active. If you pull the control out, that will turn, that won't blink anymore because the compressor won't be active. So that LED will stop flashing.
Gotcha.
It only flashes when you cross the ratio threshold, and then it starts to activate. So if that light's not blinking, the compressor's not interacting with the signal. Okay. When that light's blinking, then the compressor's operating.
And then on the other side of the ratio, there's a max indicator.
Yep, that just shows you when you've hit the top of the amplifier output. So when that blinks on, you're just hitting the limits on the amplifier.
Now,
so you're hitting full power when that blinks yellow. You've just hit just below full power.
Gotcha. And is that desirable, or is that a warning that you're starting to get into dangerous areas?
It's not a problem. I mean, the unit's fine with that. It just lets you know where you are.
Gotcha.
You wouldn't want to, for instance, have that on all the time. Mm-hmm. That would be too much. As long as it's flashing, it's no issue.
Gotcha.
This gives you an indicator that you have arrived at full power.
Good to know. Then last but not least, of course, there's the master. Mm-hmm. And an indicator that tells you you've got power, the on. And I think everybody knows that, if it's down all the way, you don't hear anything. You turn it up, you get more and more volume kind. So
Right.
that's good there. I'm going to I'm going to rotate this. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about?
I'll just mention one thing about the master control.
Sure.
On the old amplifier designs from years ago, the last control also had some gain on it, and so there's a little bit of following noise. This is actually a real level control. It's just an output level control. So when you turn it all the way up, it's just at the level that the bus was at the entire time. When you turn it down, it actually takes the signal down to ground. So it's quieter, it keeps the amplifier quieter, and it doesn't add any noise in the final parts of the output. So this whole amplifier is very quiet, and that's one of the different design reasons that it works so well that way. Just putting that level control on the back end rather than the gain control.
Gotcha. So rotating this head around, I know some of these things are obvious, very obvious, like the on and off switch is behind it, which, and it's right above the electrical input. One thing that's rather unique, as I was reading, is this head can recognize if you're running on like 110 volts like we do in the US, or 240 like they do in Europe.
Yes.
And it just self-compensates for that.
Yeah, it's a very smart power supply. So you can go any place from Japan to the outback in Australia, and they'll look at the local voltage, set itself up accordingly, and run properly.
Nice, nice. Then speaker outputs, you included 2 places for the NL4s, which I guess we refer to as speak-on cables.
Yes.
And you still had 1/4 inch output, but reading through the manual, it's more for like emergency use, because even with like one of my cabs, there's no speak-on attachment for it. So I guess you could find yourself in a situation where you still have to go with that 1/4 inch speaker cable, albeit less desirable than the speak-ons.
Yeah, they don't carry near as much current, so they're not really real desirable. But if you didn't bring any cables to the gig and all you've got is a 1/4 inch connector cord, you're kind of stuck with that.
Yeah.
And it's nice, handy for testing. I should mention something about the NL4 configuration too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of bass amps run NL2 outputs instead of NL4 connectors in the output. We run an NL4, and the reason they do that is the NL4 has 4 circuit connections. The NL2 only has 2. And so what we do is we parallel both sets of connections. So you can take an NL4 cable, which has like 4 wires in it, and when you hook them up, they're actually doubled up. So you get a lower impedance cable to the speaker than you would normally. And that helps the low B notes and the really deep bass be stronger and tighter. So that's why we did that. You can get a lower impedance on the cable, and without buying such a huge cable.
Gotcha.
And you can use the NL2s as well.
I see. And since we're talking about speakers, if we were going to connect this head to a couple of cabs, would the approach be to use both speaker outputs and put one to one cab and another cable to another? Or should we be lining up the cabs in series, where you go from the head into the top cab and then down to a next one?
You can do it either way. All those are really parallel connections at the end of the day. The difference is, if you run both connections from the back of the amplifier, you'll get the most direct path and lowest impedance and the most power to the speakers. If you daisy chain them, then the second cabinet will have a little more impedance than the cables in the first cabinet will. So it's all very minor differences, but best methodology would be to have 2 cables direct to the 2 cabinets.
Gotcha. So moving along, we start getting into something I know a lot of people are interested in, and that is the whole DI aspect of this. And you've got the DI output and some level adjusting things here. So tell me about those.
Yeah, there's 2 things here. There's a level output for the DI control, which is the top one. And then below that is the input level for the auxiliary inputs. So on this amp, there's a fixed gain on that stage, but you can control the input level. There's actually a stereo pot here behind the knob.
Gotcha.
Control that. And then between the 2 is a push button switch, which gives you a ground lift for the XLR. In a lot of cases, you'll want to lift the ground to keep ground loops from happening. And that will take care of that for you.
Gotcha. And then as we continue to shift, there's auxiliary sound, which I guess would be like if you have a CD player, kind of just stereo connection.
Yeah, that, or if you want to bring an iPhone in on an adapter, you could do that too. You know, bring in some iTunes. You can do any of that stuff. Now, I should mention that on this design, both those inputs are active, and then they're mixed and buffered. On a lot of units, they're just summed together with a resistor.
Gotcha.
This is a little more expensive way to do it, but it gives you a true mix, so you don't get subtractive things happening in your mix like you can sometimes if you just put them together with a couple of resistors. So it buffers the sides, and it works out very well.
Gotcha. Then at the very end of it, we've got 6 1/4-inch inputs, and I know what the top left is for the foot pedal.
Yes.
Okay. Talk me through the other 5.
Sure. The top one's for the foot switch, like you mentioned, and that's a 2-button foot switch, standard Fender style. So we do have a foot switch for our units, but you can actually use any Fender type foot switch and work in there just fine.
Gotcha.
So you got a spare one in the closet, you're good to go. At the bottom is a slave in, so you can actually slave this amp to another one if you need to, you know, extend your system. That's not as common these days. You know, the systems tend to be smaller and more compact than they used to be.
Gotcha.
But that feature's still available. Then there's also a pre-FX send and FX return on the next two, which is a standard, you know, normal series effects send return. And then on the other side, last two, the top one's a tuner out, you know, to go to your tuner. And on the bottom one, we decided to add another feature that a lot of amps don't have. But if you're going to rack this, there's an input in the back and there's an input in the front. So when you use the back input, the front input is out of circuit. When you use the front input, the back is out of circuit. But if you want to put a wireless in the rack, put the amplifier in there, you keep all your wiring internal.
Nice. Nice. Well, wow. Also, I'll mention, and I know it's a hot topic because lately we've been seeing that a lot of musicians have been having their equipment stolen. And there's a feature in the heads and the cabs that is designed to help recovery when it comes to, you know, stolen equipment. Tell us a little bit about that, Dave.
Yeah, these are our FDI chips. We've done this since we started the company. Because I've been in the business a long time. I've seen a lot of people's stuff stolen. I'm lucky enough not to have it happen to me, but it's so prevalent. You know, the number of friends I've had that have stuff stolen is just, you know, it's a lot. And so we thought, well, why not include this as a feature? It adds a few dollars to the cost of the unit, but it makes it somewhat recoverable. You know, the average recovery, I think, on a stolen piece of property, music property, is well under 0.5%.
Wow.
It's really a small percentage that ever comes back. With the RFID chips, if your piece of gear winds up in a pawn shop or a music store someplace, you can actually scan it with a regular veterinary scanner, like a pet chip scanner. The police generally carry those too. And you can call them up and say, hey, my amp's sitting in so-and-so's pawn shop. I want to get it back. When the guy says, no, it's not, you can scan it, come up with your number, which you've got on your manual and on your packaging when it came. We also keep it in the database too for our guys, so we have them available as well should you lose yours. And they can positively identify that as your amp or your cabinet to that RFID chip.
Gotcha.
So it makes it a lot easier to get things back, and your percentage goes way up.
Excellent, excellent. I'm sure it beats trying to engrave all your stuff with a good old engraving pencil.
You can go that route too. It's a little easier. It's already done.
Gotcha. Well, is there anything else? Again, this is great because even though there is a written manual that comes with so many electrical amplification gear, having the opportunity to be walked through some of this is greatly helpful. Now, with the 1300 head, I know more intricate as far as the EQ. What are the main differences, would you say, between those two heads?
Well, the 1350's got more bells and whistles and a lot more flexibility for things you may or may not need to do.
Gotcha.
It's also got about another 30% more power. So it's also another half a rack space higher. So it's a little bigger, a little more powerful, a little more features. I mean, that has multiple effects loops in it. It's got another foot switch controller that turns on and off, the compressor, as well as an effects send return. You can turn off an effects circuit as well. So it's got a lot more flexibility. Not everybody needs all those features, but it's great if you do. You can do all that stuff with it. They both have the same basic preamp structure. The sound character is about the same in both of them. The differences are all typically in the amount of power available and the extra features on board.
Gotcha. Well, and now that we've had probably a lot of people listening to this, I'm sure their next question is, how can I get a hold of a DNA amp head or cab? What's the best way for them to pursue this?
The very best thing is to contact one of our dealers in their area. If there isn't anybody in the area, drop us a line on our email, info email for davidamps.com, and we'll get in touch with somebody, and we can't get them hooked up with somebody taken care of.
Gotcha. Well, David, thank you so much. This has been most instructive, and I'm sure that I can't even say this is much better than me trying to go over the manual explaining what things do. What is very drolling on, where obviously you've kind of looked at this from all the possible angles. So thank you very much for sharing this information with us, folks. DNA Amplification, check them out. It's amazing sounding gear. I'm going to play some more with this and try to get some sound samples to go along with this video as well. So thanks again, David.
Thanks, Raul.
Have a happy year of bass amplification.
Best to you as well.
Thank you very much.
Take care.